Here's a video showing me making a razor and most of the process that I use to make the razor. Here's the completed razor. I started with this piece of 01 tool steel. It's 5/16 thick. I started with some rough layout lines for the bandsaw. On this one, I didn't forge the tang out. I did a little bit of stock removal and a little bit of forging, just to save some time in the shop and wear and tear on my hammering arm. I use these little scraps of 01 to make little knives with. So, not a lot of metal's going to waste. So after I get it sawed out, I'm knocking off the hard corners before I start forging on it. And when I sawed it out, I was a bit nervous because I was trying to think of the camera and really wasn't paying attention, and I sawed off the wrong side, so I redrew the tang and sawed it again. I decided to go ahead and leave the mistakes in this video and show it like it really happened. So here I am just getting rid of the sharp edges again. So I'm gonna turn on the propane forge and let it get up to temperature. It takes a few minutes before it gets up to forging temperature. So I'm putting it in and letting it heat up. So I'm wire brushing some of the scale off. Now I'm going to draw out the tang. I'm using my post anvil. I like this little anvil for working on razors. Yeah, sawing the tail and tang out saves a little bit of hammering time and a little bit of wear and tear on my arm, so I'm happy to do it. Now I'm putting the curve into the tang. I kind of like straight razors that have long monkey tails. That's why I tend to make the really long tails like that. I'm just making sure it's straight. And now I'm putting a little bit of bevel and curve into the blade, so it'll take less time grinding, and it'll also have some smile in the blade. You can see I let the forging get a little bit out of hand and crooked there, but I straightened it up later. So now I'm putting it back in the forge. I decided I'd go ahead and put a twisted tang on it. I wasn't sure if I was going to when I started the project. So I'm just clamping it in the leg vise and using a wrench to put the twist in with. And since I already put the curve in the tail, it's going in the wrong direction, so I'll have to straighten it out and make it go in the right direction now. So I'm just knocking down the sides of the twist a little bit. Now I'm going to fix the tail there where I had it bent in the wrong direction. Yeah, I decided at the last minute to put the twist in. I really never know what it's going to end up looking like because I change my mind so much throughout the process. So now that I got it roughly forged to shape, I'm going to anneal it in the oven. And annealing just means I'm going to make the metal soft so I can work it with hand tools and files. So it's been annealed in the oven. I'm taking it out and I'm going to start the hand work to it now. Now I'm wire brushing the scale from the forge. The forge burns the metal and leaves some scale on the outside. And I'm going to refine the blade shape some with a saw and files. And again, I could forge this closer to shape and spend more time forging, but I'd rather just rough forge it and finish it on machinery. So now I'm just at the leg vise again, and I'm going to file down where I roughly have it sawed to shape. and I'm using the belt grinder to shape the front of the blade. Now I'm going to drill the pivot hole on the drill press. And this is what a dull drill bit sounds like. It was cutting, so I didn't change it or take time to sharpen it, but I will before I use it again. So now I'm going to start rough grinding the bevel. I got a pair of vice grips on the tang so I can really put leverage on it and put a lot of pressure and take the metal off. Now I got it roughly ground, and I'm going to define the profile of it. So I'm going to make the edge of the blade basically match the back of the spine. Now I'm going to do a little more rough grinding. It's still a little bit too thick to heat treat. And before the heat treating, I'm going to break all the sharp edges just to prevent cracking. I don't want any stress risers. And I filed all the edges and broke all the edges and rounded them off, and now I'm going to buff it and just trying to alleviate any problems that'll cause from stress during the heat treat. And the buffing wheel leaves wax on the razor, and the easiest way to get it off is just put it back in the forge, burn it all off. Now I'm going to put it in the kiln, and this is kind of a boring, repetitive process, but I figured I'd go ahead and show it all. And what I'm doing is I'm heating it up to 1500, which is the critical temperature where more or less everything in the metal goes into solution. And I'm just heating it up and letting it air cool. I'm doing that 3 times. And that's stress relieving the metal and kind of repairing the grain from the forging. Forging's pretty hard on the grain structure because it gets pretty hot. And the last time through, I'm going to heat it up again. And I'm going to let it soak for a good 10 minutes. And then I'm going to put it in the quench oil to harden it. So this is the last time in the oven. I'm going to leave it in there for a while, 10 minutes like I said. I'm going to take it out and put it into the quench oil, and this is what makes the razor hard. Right now the razor is hard, but it's very brittle. So to get rid of some of the brittleness, I'm tempering it at 400 degrees. And this will make the razor blade a little less brittle. So now I'm wire brushing off scale again from being in the kiln. The kiln burns off the first layer of metal on the outside. Burns the carbon out of it. So I decided I want to do a surface treatment on the handle and the spine. So the first thing I'm doing is cleaning it off with acetone. And then I'm putting gun blue on the tang and the spine. And I'm dabbing the gun blue on in kind of a rough, random, heavy pattern. And then I dip it in bleach, and the reaction between the gun bluing and the bleach really chews up the surface and it accentuates the rough surface, which is the look that I'm going for. You can see it's all rusty and pitted, and it's pitting it and rusting it a little more. There's a chemical reaction between the gun bluing and the bleach. So now I'm wire brushing all the rust off. And I'm starting final grinding. So when I do the final grinding, I don't use any rest. I just do it with my hands. And you got to make sure the razor doesn't get too hot during final grinding, so I'll cool it down frequently. As it starts getting thinner, you got to take more care with it and go more slowly. One of the methods I like to use a lot to get the blade thin enough is I grind it down to where the edge is about 0.010 or a little bit less thick. So now I'm measuring the blade to see how thick it is. It's about 0.009 on the edge now. So I'll take it to a coarse diamond hone and I'll put the first edge on the blade. And the reason for this is to put the edge or the bevel on the edge of the blade, and I can see where I need to grind more. The bevel will be big where I need to grind more. So more or less this is just a guide for grinding at this point. And that's an extra coarse diamond hone. And there you can see the bevel. So now the blade's really thin, so it takes careful attention now. So I do a lot of grinding and a lot of looking to see where I need to grind. So now the blade's getting really thin on the end. It'll be around 3 thousandths, 5 thousandths of an inch thick, thereabouts. And that bevel works as a guide, as a visual guide, so I don't have to measure the whole time. So now I'm figuring out what shape I want to make the scales. So I'm just tracing the profile on a piece of notebook paper. So this is the material. I'm going to use this micarta for the scales. I got tape on top of the micarta so I can draw on it. I'm going to put a piece of carbon paper between my drawing and the micarta and transfer the pattern to the micarta. So now I'm sawing out the first scale. And I saw pretty, I leave a little bit to sand off. I don't saw exactly on the line. Then go to the belt grinder and I sand to the line. Now I'm going to use that scale to draw out the other scale for the other side. And sawing out the second scale. And I'll use double-sided scotch tape to put the two scale halves together. This way, if I work them both at the same time, they'll be the exact same shape. So the first thing I'm going to do is sand them so they're both the same exact shape. And now I'm going to drill the pivot hole and the wedge hole while the scales are still square. Now I'm starting the process to round the scales off and to shape them. I'm using the slack part of the belt sander to do that. Now I'm going to put a little texturing into the scales. Put a small little 3/8 contact wheel in the belt grinder. Now I'm going to buff the scales. Smooth out at the sanding marks with a buffer. I'm laying out where the wedge is going to go, figuring out the shape of it and how far I can get it between the scales and it won't interfere with the blade. I have the pivot end mocked up with little nuts and bolts right now. Now that I got the line on there, I'm going to transfer the shape to the micarta. Saw it out a little big, make sure I stay on the outside of the lines on the bandsaw. And drill the pivot hole while everything's still square. And I'm going to use this disc sander to taper the wedge. So I'm putting more pressure with my 2 fingers on the end, so that end gets ground down more and it makes a wedge shape. There you can see the layers. I'm using some 5-minute epoxy now to glue it in place. And I'm adjusting the wedge a little bit so it just barely clears the blade. And now that the wedge is glued in, I'm sanding it down flush with the scales. And I'm going to buff where I sand it again to buff out the scratch marks. And this is my hole punch that I used to make the shim washers. The shim washers are going to end up going between the blade and the scale. The first thing I do is punch the small hole in the washers. And then I punch a big hole. And this is what the completed washers look like. And I decided to grind the heel of the blade a little bit. I thought it had better symmetry and matched with the front that way. Now I'm dipping the blade in the ferric chloride, and the ferric chloride is going to get rid of the shiny metal and turn it a gray, give me a gray gunmetal finish, a dark finish. When the blade first comes out of the ferric chloride, it looks really dark. You gotta do some cleaning on it to get rid of that black. Now I'm peening the wedge end. I'm going to peen the pivot end. Now I'm starting the sharpening or the honing process. That's a 1000 grit nanowall there. Then I moved to a 4000 grit Norton. Just using a rolling extro to hone that smiling blade. Then to an 8000 grit Norton. Now I'm using a 12,000 grit nanowall. And at this point, it's just barely the weight of the blade. I'm using virtually no pressure. Going nice and slow with very light pressure. And this is a natural Japanese stone from the Nakayama mine. I'm going to use this to finish on. And here's the razor in action. I'm using my Ray Bucati SpongeBob brush. And here's the razor. I got about a week's worth of growth. And this is the razor's maiden voyage. I just honed it and I'm testing it out right now. I'm in the living room and I have a little mirror propped up about 5 feet away, so I'm using all my brain power to shave here. And first pass, I didn't worry about getting all the hair. I'll clean it up the second pass. The first pass I went north to south with the grain, and the second pass I'm going to go against the grain. Kind of shave from the bottom up. And this will get any hairs that I left the first pass. And I got a little nick on my neck right there. All in all, it went pretty good. It still needs one more trip to the hones to make it perfect, but that was acceptable. Thanks for watching the video.